He is a criminal. And Ron Darling is about to explain exactly why 10 of baseball's greatest legends turned their backs on him completely. This is not gossip. This is not rumor. This is documented fact and legal precedent. Imagine a split-screen vibe. On one side, Ron Darling sitting in a broadcast booth, composed and dignified, a man who earned respect through decades of service to the game. On the other side, Lenny Dykstra in his playing prime, swinging with that aggressive spark that made him famous, that raw intensity that fans loved. But what happened between them started at Fenway Park in 1986 and ended in a courtroom where a judge basically said Dykstra's reputation was so thoroughly destroyed that he could not even be defamed anymore. Let that sink in. The law said his reputation was beyond protection. This is the story of how a World Series hero became what the law officially calls libel-proof. This is the reckoning that baseball had to face when the silence finally broke. Here's why it matters and why you need to hear this story. If you're loving what you're hearing already, give this video some hype right now. Your engagement keeps us bringing stories like this to you every single week. We appreciate every single person who supports this channel and trusts us with their time. When Ron Darling released his memoir called 108 Stitches in 2019, he made a decision that fundamentally changed how baseball could talk about its past. He made a choice that scared him. He decided to break the code of silence. The unwritten rule in baseball clubhouses is sacred and ancient and deeply enforced. You keep the dirty laundry inside. You do not air it to the public decades later. You do not betray the brotherhood. You carry the secrets with you to the grave. Managers and players and owners have all understood this rule for generations. But Darling chose differently. He chose to tell the truth. He chose accountability over brotherhood. He chose transparency over loyalty. He chose justice over silence. He risked his reputation within baseball to do it. What he revealed about Lenny Dykstra was not mild criticism about a bad teammate, or even serious concerns about character. It was an accusation of something much darker, something that violated fundamental human dignity. Darling described the 1986 World Series Game 3 at Fenway Park as a moment where Dykstra unleashed what Darling called the worst collection of racist, hateful, foul insults he had ever heard in his entire life. Darling said it was worse than even the vitriol thrown at Jackie Robinson when he broke the color line and changed baseball forever. That is a staggering claim. That is not something you say lightly. That is not something you say unless you really mean it and you believe it with every fiber of your being and you have carried it with you for decades. Darling described it as vicious and hateful beyond anything he had experienced in his life. He said Dykstra stood in the on-deck circle and just let loose. The Red Sox pitcher Dennis Oil Can Boyd was on the mound preparing to pitch for the series, and Dykstra was just attacking him with slurs and insults and racial epithets. It was not just one comment. It was a barrage of hateful language. Darling heard it clearly. He could not escape it. It echoed in the stadium. It was horrible. Darling carried guilt about this moment for decades. He knew it was wrong then. He absolutely knew it was wrong, but he did nothing then. He was a young man in a clubhouse culture that protected itself. He was a teammate, and he stayed silent. The silence was complicity. But decades later, when he sat down to write his memoir, he decided that silence had gone on long enough. He decided to speak. He decided to tell the truth, no matter the consequences. He was in his 50s by then. He had lived with that guilt for so long. When Dykstra sued Darling and the publishers for defamation, something extraordinary happened in the courtroom. The judge did not even decide if Darling's story was true or false. Instead, Justice Robert Kalish invoked a rare legal concept called the libel-proof plaintiff doctrine. This doctrine exists for situations so extreme that a person's reputation is already destroyed beyond repair. The court said that before Darling's book even came out, before the public even knew about the Fenway incident, Dykstra was already known to the public as a racist, a misogynist, a sexual predator, a drug abuser, a thief, and an embezzler. The judge literally listed all of these things in his ruling. The judge said the evidence was clear and substantial and overwhelming. Dykstra's own actions and his own admissions had already painted this picture for the world. The picture was complete. So when Darling made his specific claim about racist taunts, it could not hurt him further. The law basically stamped his file and said he was beyond defaming. His reputation could not go lower because it had already hit bottom. That is how low Dykstra had fallen in the eyes of the law and in the eyes of the public. That ruling changed everything about how the baseball world could talk about him. That ruling was definitive and final and binding. That ruling was final. And it explains why 10 legendary figures in the sport wanted absolutely nothing to do with him. These were not casual dismissals. These were not mild rejections or gentle departures. These were deliberate separations from a man who had crossed too many lines. The court had spoken. The law had made its judgment. The legends followed suit. The message was clear. Let us start with Wally Backman, number 10 in our countdown. Wally Backman was Dykstra's catalyst partner on the 1986 Mets. They were the dynamic duo that sparked the team's explosive offensive production. Backman and Dykstra were together in the clubhouse during the chaos, together in the winning streaks, together celebrating the championship run. They were young men together. The two were inseparable during those glory days. They fed off each other's energy like a perfect match. They pushed each other to play harder and take bigger risks on the field. They drank together. They partied together. But by the 1990s, as the team was dismantled and scattered to different cities and different teams, something fundamental happened. The bonds dissolved. Backman himself faced his own legal struggles and managerial problems over the years. He had challenges and obstacles, but Backman stayed a baseball lifer. He stayed connected to the game in meaningful ways. He stayed involved with younger players. He stayed respected by the baseball community. He earned respect through his work ethic and his growth. He rebuilt himself. He didn't give up. Dykstra did the opposite. His treachery on and off the field led to total expulsion from the baseball fraternity. Nobody wanted to sign him. Nobody wanted to mentor him. Nobody wanted to be associated with him. His name became toxic. The chilly atmosphere in the Mets clubhouse by 1992 signaled the end of the Dykstra era. Nobody wanted to be around him anymore. Teammates avoided him. Front offices refused to hire him. Backman distanced himself and never looked back. He moved forward. Where Dykstra went down a path of crime and betrayal and chaos and prison, Backman chose redemption within baseball. He chose to rebuild his reputation through his actions. He chose to stay connected to the game he loved and that had given him everything. Next is Mookie Wilson, number 9 in our countdown. Mookie Wilson is universally regarded as the moral center and the conscience of the 1986 Mets. This was not a role he appointed himself to. This was not something he asked for. This was a status earned through his character and his dignity and his grace, through the way he lived. When asked about Dykstra's fall from grace, Wilson expressed deep sadness. It hurt a lot to see teammates go down difficult roads. It hurt because Wilson cared. Wilson was genuinely compassionate. He had empathy. But Wilson also made something absolutely clear in his statements. Their priorities had diverged. That divergence was not about money or fame or career trajectory or business success. It was about values. It was about what you believed mattered. It was about who you chose to be. It was about right and wrong. Mookie Wilson represented a moral baseline in that clubhouse. He was the conscience of that community. He set a standard. Wilson's perspective was that they were a happy family, but individual choices broke that family apart. Dykstra made choices that violated the family structure. Dykstra made choices that Wilson could not accept. Wilson's legacy of grace and decency stands as a silent rebuke to the thug behavior that Darling identified in Dykstra. When Mookie Wilson says his heart hurts for what happened to Dykstra, that is genuine compassion. But when he says, "We chose different paths," that is a judgment. And that judgment reflects the view of someone whose opinion matters deeply, in baseball and beyond. Keith Hernandez is number 8 in our countdown. Keith Hernandez was the veteran leader and the intellectual cornerstone of the 1986 Mets. He was involved in the team's off-field partying and the social scene. He was not some distant authority figure lecturing everyone from on high about discipline and focus. He was in the mix. But Hernandez had something Dykstra lacked in fundamental ways. He had a cerebral approach to the game. Hernandez understood baseball intellectually at levels that Dykstra never reached. He understood that success required discipline and structure underneath the chaos. He understood the game's history and its traditions and its unwritten code. He studied the game. The tension between Hernandez's leadership style and Dykstra's raw, unruly aggression was documented in the documentary film Once Upon a Time in Queens. You can see the difference between them. Hernandez prioritized the team's legacy and the franchise's future. Dykstra prioritized the moment, the next high, the next thrill. Hernandez understood consequences. Dykstra ignored them. After baseball, Hernandez became a refined broadcaster and television personality. He maintained dignity throughout his career. He maintained respect and professional standards. He built something meaningful. He became respected in broadcasting. Dykstra did the opposite. Dykstra fell into what some called the calaboose, which is prison. He served time for his crimes. The intellectual divide between them grew wider with every year that passed. One man ascended and the other descended. Curt Schilling comes in at number 7 in our countdown. Curt Schilling and Dykstra were both on the 1993 Phillies squad. They were teammates during that famous Macho Row era. They played together in the clubhouse. Schilling has been vocal about what he observed and experienced with Dykstra. He describes it as excess and betrayal. He watched the culture that enabled Dykstra and felt it was damaging to the franchise. He saw how Dykstra operated. Schilling's disdain centers on one fundamental fact. Dykstra admitted he used steroids to enhance his performance. He did not just use steroids quietly, he admitted it publicly. And when Dykstra admitted it, he did something calculated and cruel. He tried to implicate the entire Phillies organization in his decision to use steroids. He tried to spread the blame. He tried to say it was not just his choice, but the organization's fault. That is not accountability. That is deflection. That is trying to avoid responsibility. Schilling values what he calls the wall of fame integrity of the Phillies franchise. That is a specific standard, and it is a high standard. Dykstra's behavior violated that standard completely. Schilling has called Dykstra the most selfish human being he ever encountered in a clubhouse. That is not hyperbole or exaggeration. That is a direct statement from someone who spent months in close quarters with him. Schilling's disdain comes from seeing someone prioritize personal gain over the integrity of the sport and the organization. Dwight Gooden is number 6 in our countdown. Dwight Gooden shared a complicated and strange bond with Dykstra on the 1986 Mets. Both men were celebrated as young talents with tremendous potential ahead of them. Both men fell into addiction and substance abuse. Both men faced legal troubles and served time in prison. Their paths were parallel in ways that created a strange mirror effect. They could have gone down the same road, but they made different choices. When Darling made his accusations about Dykstra's racist taunts at Fenway, Gooden said he never heard slurs during that game. Gooden did not corroborate Darling's story. He was not there to confirm the allegations. Gooden did not hear it from his position, but that did not make Gooden and Dykstra allies or friends. The broader context of their lives tells a different story altogether. Gooden became open about his failings. He spoke publicly about the abuse he suffered as a child. He pursued redemption with transparency. He faced his demons. He sought help. Dykstra did something different. Dykstra maintained a win-at-all-costs mentality throughout his life. Darling described it as sociopathic. Gooden distanced himself from that energy. The shared tragedy of 1986 did not bring them closer. It pushed them apart. Gooden sought light. Gooden sought healing. Dykstra sought power. Darryl Strawberry is number 5 in our countdown. Darryl Strawberry and Lenny Dykstra had a unique and complex connection based on shared struggles. Both men struggled deeply with addiction and substance abuse. Both men were dominant players with incredible talent on the field. Both men were celebrated young stars. Both men had dramatic falls from grace. But Strawberry's trajectory diverged from Dykstra's at a critical moment. This is where their paths separated. Strawberry initially defended Dykstra against Darling's accusations of racism. He said the story sounded false. He stood up for his former teammate publicly. He gave him benefit of the doubt. He believed in loyalty. Then Dykstra released his own memoir called House of Nails. In that book, Dykstra trash-talked his former teammates. He attacked them. He made accusations. He refused to show accountability. He showed no remorse. Strawberry read it, and his position flipped completely. Strawberry said Dykstra should be ashamed of himself for the trash talk and the lack of remorse shown throughout the entire book. Strawberry pointed out that his own focus shifted to Christian ministry and actual redemption. That is the opposite of what Dykstra was doing. Strawberry's Christian faith and commitment to recovery and spiritual growth stood in direct opposition to Dykstra's continued public defiance. The betrayal Strawberry felt was personal and theological. It was about failing to repent. John Krook is number 4 in our countdown. John Krook's history with Dykstra is tied directly to one terrible night that changed everything. May 1991. A bachelor party was happening to celebrate John Krook. Dykstra was there. Dykstra got behind the wheel of a Mercedes. His blood alcohol content was 0.179%, which is more than double the legal limit. He drove that car into a tree. He injured himself. He injured teammate Darren Daulton. He nearly ended his own career before it truly began its decline. He could have killed people. Krook was a central figure on the 1993 Phillies team. He was part of that squad. But the internal friction about Dykstra's reckless behavior never went away. The incident was never forgotten. Later, Dykstra admitted to steroid use. That admission created more distance between him and his former teammates. Krook maintained a positive reputation in his retirement. He stayed connected to baseball in healthy ways. He distanced himself from Dykstra's chaotic and destructive life. The crash was a warning sign. Dykstra did not heed it. He continued down the same path. He made more bad decisions. Krook watched and separated himself from it completely. Mitch Williams is number 3 in our countdown. Mitch Williams and Lenny Dykstra were teammates on the 1993 Phillies squad on Macho Row. They played together, they drank together, they partied together. But their relationship became defined by public vitriol that spanned decades. The feud reached a public peak during a roast in Philadelphia in 2015. Dykstra showed up at the event trying to promote his investment website. He was trying to rebrand himself completely. He was trying to move past his prison conviction. He was trying to act like he still belonged in the baseball world. He was trying to make jokes about his past. But the crowd and his former teammates would not let him. They would not allow him to rehabilitate his image. Williams retorted that Dykstra lacked common sense. Williams made a statement that stuck with everyone who heard it. He said, "You could have better conversations with trees than with Dykstra." That is a devastating insult on every level. It is not about anger or temporary frustration. It is about fundamental incompatibility on a deeper level. It is saying this person is not even on the level of a tree in terms of communication ability. Trees cannot talk back. Trees cannot argue. Yet Williams said talking to a tree would be better than talking to Dykstra. This rivalry underscores Dykstra's tendency to alienate the very teammates who once shared his aggressive approach to playing the game and living life. By 2015, the bridge was completely burned. There was no way back. Dennis Oil Can Boyd is number 2 in our countdown. Dennis Boyd is the person Darling claimed Dykstra targeted with racial taunts and insults at Fenway Park in Game 3 of the 1986 World Series. Boyd did not hear the insults at the time. He was on the mound, preparing to pitch for the Red Sox. He was focused on his job. He was focused on executing pitches and getting batters out. Dykstra was in the on-deck circle, hurling the insults and hateful language. But years later, when Darling's story emerged publicly, Boyd validated its plausibility. Boyd said the atmosphere of that 1986 series was absolutely charged with hostility and tension. Boyd said that given Dykstra's reputation and his history, the account was entirely believable. Boyd said, "Yes, that sounds like the Lenny Dykstra I knew." Boyd noted that Dykstra had cultivated a thug persona over the years. That is how Boyd described it directly. A thug who used bigotry as a weapon of intimidation. A thug who crossed lines that should not be crossed. Boyd's stance represents the many opponents who faced Dykstra across the years in the sport. Boyd's perspective is that Dykstra crossed a line between aggressive gamesmanship and sociopathic behavior. Boyd did not necessarily say he could confirm the exact story word for word. He said the character trait described fits the man he knew. Ron Darling is number 1 in our countdown. Ron Darling broke the code of silence. In a traditional baseball clubhouse, you never betray the team's secrets to the outside world. That is baseball law. That is sacred and inviolable. Darling broke that law because he said it was the right thing to do. He called it an ethical reckoning with his own past. He said he carried guilt. Darling said the 1986 Mets clubhouse was a fraternity of young boys who were complicit in behavior they should have challenged. He carried shame for that complicity for decades. He went through life with that burden. He thought about it. He dreamed about it. When Darling decided to write his memoir, he decided to tell what he saw and heard. He decided to tell the full truth. He described the worst collection of taunts and insults he had ever heard. He attributed them to Dykstra. He put it in his book. He published it for the world to read. Dykstra sued for defamation. Dykstra threatened legal action. Dykstra said it was a lie. Dykstra denied it vehemently. Darling did not back down. He said, "There is no chance I misremembered it." That statement from Darling became the foundation of everything that followed. Darling solidified his status as the most prominent voice against Dykstra's character. And when the court sided with Darling and dismissed the libel suit, it validated what he had risked by speaking truth. It proved he was right all along. It vindicated his decision to break silence. But the hatred from these 10 legends was not created by Darling's book alone. The book was not the cause. The book opened a door that had been sealed shut for decades. But behind that door was a lifetime of crimes and transgressions and predatory behavior that made the court's decision inevitable and necessary. The hatred made sense because the accusations made sense. The real crimes came later, much worse crimes, predatory crimes. In 1999, Dykstra was arrested for sexually harassing a 17-year-old female employee at his car wash business. This was a minor. This was a child in the eyes of the law. The charges were later dismissed, but the arrest happened. The accusation was made. The investigation occurred. The facts came out. The bankruptcy fraud was another layer of his criminal enterprise. In 2009, Dykstra declared personal bankruptcy. He claimed a net worth of $58 million. He claimed to have accumulated massive wealth during his career and business ventures. He listed less than $50,000 in assets against $31 million in debt. The numbers did not add up. Something was wrong. Federal trustees discovered he lied under oath. He lied during depositions. He lied during court proceedings. He hid more than $400,000 worth of assets from his mansion. He sold items he did not own the right to sell. He destroyed property. He was convicted of these crimes. He received 3 years in federal prison for bankruptcy fraud. He also received charges for grand theft auto. He was sentenced to 270 days in jail for that conviction as well. The financial crimes showed a clear pattern of lying and theft and fraud. It showed a man who believed the rules did not apply to him. Then came the umpire blackmail admission. This was perhaps the most damning and revealing crime because Dykstra admitted to it himself. Dykstra admitted spending $500,000 to hire private investigators to blackmail Major League Baseball umpires systematically. He wanted to discover the umpires' dirty secrets, their sexual orientation, their gambling habits, anything he could use as leverage against them, anything he could weaponize. His goal was clear and explicit. He wanted a more favorable strike zone when he was batting. He wanted the umpires to give him better calls and more favorable judgments. He wanted to cheat the game fundamentally. He wanted to gain an unfair advantage through intimidation and threats. Dykstra boasted that he led the league in walks as a result of this fear. He was proud of cheating. He admitted it in his own autobiography, House of Nails. He bragged about it on a national radio show for millions of listeners. He sat down and told the world what he did. That is the measure of his character. When confronted with evidence of cheating, he did not apologize. He did not show remorse. He took credit. He said, "Yes, that was me, and I am proud of it." In 2018, Dykstra was arrested after an incident with an Uber driver. He pulled a gun on the driver. He possessed cocaine. He was arrested. He claimed he was the victim. That is the pattern. Every crime becomes a victim narrative. Every accusation becomes someone else's fault. Dykstra never takes responsibility. The statistics bear this out. In 1993, the year he claimed his private investigator team was most active with umpires, his walk rate jumped from 10.2% to 16.7%. That is a massive jump. That is not normal aging. That is not a maturing approach at the plate. That is what a man looks like when he is using blackmail to manipulate the game. These crimes are not abstract debates about what happened. They are not he said, she said disputes about he said accusations. They are court records. They are official documents. They are convictions. They are admissions. They are facts. They are the foundation for why 10 legends wanted nothing to do with him. These crimes are why the court said his reputation was too destroyed to be harmed further. These crimes are why the law itself labeled him libel-proof. The pattern is clear. The evidence is substantial. The crimes are documented. The victims are real. The fallout is ongoing. But the question remains, how does this happen? How does a World Series champion become a criminal? How does a player with talent and opportunity fall so far into lawlessness and depravity? The answer lies in the culture that created him. The answer lies in the environment that protected him. The answer lies in systems that looked the other way. The 1986 Mets and the 1993 Phillies were famous for their excess. They were famous for their bad boy image. They were celebrated for it by fans and by media outlets. Newspapers wrote about their antics with admiration and amusement. Television covered their exploits like entertainment and spectacle. Fans loved the bad boy narrative because it was exciting and different and felt transgressive. The clubhouse culture was called Scum Bunch and Macho Row. Those were not criticisms at the time. Those were names they wore with pride and celebration and swagger. The culture prioritized camaraderie and immediate joy and fun over any consideration of consequences. That is what Jeff Pearlman documented carefully in his book, The Bad Guys Won. The teams did not care about fallout. They cared about the next party. They cared about the next game. They cared about winning now and living large now. They cared about pleasure in the moment and did not think about tomorrow. That was the culture. That was the environment. That culture protected Dykstra for decades. Teammates knew about his behavior. They knew about the aggression. They knew about the recklessness. They knew about the predatory stuff. They knew the truth. They said nothing. They protected the code. They protected the brotherhood. They stayed silent. The silence enabled Dykstra. The silence allowed his crimes to continue unchecked for years. The silence was complicity. Ron Darling carried guilt about that silence for decades. He carried shame in his heart. He was part of that system. He benefited from winning with Dykstra. He also benefited from the culture of silence that allowed Dykstra's crimes to continue unchecked. He won a championship, but at what cost? When Darling broke that silence in 2019, he was breaking more than just a rule. He was signaling that the rules had changed. He was saying that the law and the legends of the game would no longer protect those who committed crimes or exhibited systemic bigotry. He was drawing a line. That is the moment that matters. That is the critical turning point. The moment when the baseball world decided that there are limits. There is a threshold. There is a line. You can be a bad guy. You can be aggressive. You can party. You can push boundaries. You can be edgy, but you cannot cross into sexual assault. You cannot cross into fraud. You cannot cross into blackmail. You cannot cross into admitted racism. When you cross those lines, the code of silence breaks. The brotherhood dissolves. The protection ends. The legends turn their backs. The law turns against you. Dykstra crossed every line. He did not just cross them once. He crossed them repeatedly. He crossed them and then lied about them. He crossed them and then bragged about them. He crossed them and then claimed to be the victim. That is when the legends decided. That is when Ron Darling decided to speak. That is when the court decided that his reputation was beyond repair. That is when 10 of baseball's greatest players decided they wanted nothing to do with him. The decision was unanimous. The rejection was complete. There was no ambiguity about what these legends thought of Lenny Dykstra. What this case teaches us is important and timely and relevant to everyone. It teaches us that even in a game built on brotherhood and tradition and loyalty and the sacred code, there are limits. There is a threshold. There is a line that cannot be crossed without consequences. It teaches us that the old code of silence no longer holds in this modern era. It teaches us that baseball is bigger than any one player, no matter how talented or important. It teaches us that winning a championship is not more important than integrity and values. It teaches us that aggressive play on the field is not the same as criminal behavior off the field. It teaches us that a player can be a folk hero and still become a pariah. Those two things can be true simultaneously. You can have great moments and terrible character. You can contribute to something beautiful and still be fundamentally broken as a person. Lenny Dykstra was a spark plug on the field. He was a talented player with real ability and instinct and baseball intelligence. He contributed to championship teams. He had moments of glory and excitement. That part of his legacy is real and documented and true. But his legacy is no longer defined by his leadoff home runs or his aggressive style at the plate. His legacy is now defined by treachery and crime. His legacy is defined by the victims who suffered because of his actions. His legacy is defined by the legends who wanted nothing to do with him. His legacy is defined by the court decision that said his reputation was so thoroughly destroyed by crime and bigotry that it could not be damaged further. His legacy is defined by the law saying he was libel-proof. That is how he will be remembered. The 1986 Mets will always be remembered as champions. They will always be celebrated for winning. They earned that place in history. But Ron Darling's book added a footnote to that history. The footnote says that not everyone in that clubhouse was equal. Not everyone had the same character. Some players chose accountability. Some players chose redemption. Some players chose to break the code when the code was protecting crimes. Darling was one of those players. The 10 legends profiled here were all players who chose to distance themselves from Dykstra's path. They chose different roads. They chose integrity over brotherhood. They chose values over loyalty. That choice matters now more than ever. That choice defines them as men. That choice is what separates the legends from the pariah. Baseball will move forward into the future. New generations of players will come and go. New teams will win championships. New stories will be told. But this case will remain in the historical record. It will remain as a landmark in the intersection of sports culture and media law. And when he did, he became truly alone. That choice matters now more than ever. That choice defines them as men and as legends. That choice is what separates the true legends from the pariah. Baseball will move forward into the future. New generations of players will come and go. New teams will win championships. New stories will be told and retold. But this case will remain in the historical record. It will remain as a landmark in the intersection of sports culture and media law. It will remain as a clear statement that even for a World Series hero, even for someone talented, there is a threshold of transgression that the law and the legends of the game will not forgive. That threshold exists and it is real. Dykstra crossed it completely. He violated it repeatedly. And when he did, the brotherhood ended. That is what happened. The story of Lenny Dykstra and Ron Darling is not just about baseball. It is about human character and human dignity. It is about accountability and consequences. It is about what happens when silence protects the wrong people and crimes go unspoken. It is about power and morality, and the difference between winning and doing the right thing. It is about friendship and loyalty, but also about justice. It is about standing up even when it costs you something personally. It is about courage. This case will be studied in media law classes. It will be analyzed in sports history courses. It will be referenced whenever people talk about the intersection of sports culture and criminal behavior. The libel-proof plaintiff doctrine had rarely been invoked before this case. But Dykstra's crimes and admissions had accumulated to the point where even the law had to acknowledge that his reputation could not be damaged further. That is a profound statement about how far someone can fall. That is a powerful message about consequences and accountability. Baseball continues on. New players come every year with their own stories and their own moral choices to make. Some will choose integrity, like Darling and the 10 Legends. Some will choose silence and complicity. Some will choose to look the other way. But the example of Lenny Dykstra stands as a powerful warning. It stands as a cautionary tale. It stands as proof that there is a threshold. There is a line. Cross it enough times, and the brotherhood dissolves. The law comes. The legends turn their backs. And you are left alone with the consequences of your actions. That is his ultimate legacy. Like this video, subscribe to the channel, comment with your thoughts about this story, share this with your friends who care about baseball history and justice and accountability. Thank you for watching and for your support of what we do.